You. Oh, it's recording. Awesome. All right, cool. So this book, Span of Control, has been really good. I was looking for something that would help me come out and navigate a really tough season. Some of you know my story. And so what I wanted to do was basically have some encouragement. And if you're at a place to be able to initiate some skill sets that would help working in limited capacity, high emotional transition circumstances, and still have the quality of life increase and not have to give up on your dreams, because I went through a lot of mental work to basically get where I am today. So two things. This will be, you'll have action things you can take, or if you just come today and the only thing you hear is it's going to be okay, then that is perfect and exactly great, because God is working things for our good, even when it's really, really hard. And so just know that it's going to be okay and all the things. All right. So to jump into it. So overwhelm, we've talked about, you hear that in your head, crushing, daunting life, those times happen. And so this can happen in the circumstances of work or personal life, or sometimes if you have like a perfect storm, you have both hit at the same time. The reason this happens is because the enemy likes to time things well. And there's something called a season of contradiction. Now, there's a guy, Lance Walnew, he actually does some personal development, and he talks about this season of contradiction. It is, you have short-term seasons and then you have long-term seasons. And those long-term seasons are like a chunk of life. Typically, before you get into your purpose and your calling, there's a season of contradiction. It is literally a season that looks completely opposite than the very thing God has called you to in your life. And because that is there, a lot of times we end up questioning our identity, questioning our purpose. Are we on the right track? And so know that everyone goes through the short, hard term seasons. Everyone goes through that. The long, hard seasons, not everyone goes through this. And this is, I'm talking an extended season. This is a chunk of life. We're talking over a year, although 6 months can feel like a couple of years, depending on how intense it is. So I want to make have a difference of knowing, I'm not talking about people who won't grow, who are resistant. And you see this in people's how they speak in their actions. A lot of people who don't want to grow, and typically if we're growth minded, we're always like, am I that person? Am I the person doing that? Do I need to change something? A lot of times there's talk and no action. There's always a negative, and zero action happening. So what I'm talking about is the people even go like, I mean, trust me, I've complained in seasons. I've not been super amazing at that, but I want you to know that it looks a little different because you're having, where even though if you're complaining a lot or it's a little hard, you're having where your words and what you're doing is creating momentum forward. And so a lot of times in these seasons, we think there's something wrong with us or we've done something wrong. And what I was talking about is the enemy uses these times to take you out, whether it's creating a mental tape of that this is how it's always going to be. This is how you're never going to fulfill things, just those lies that sort of creep in, and then you agree with them. And when that agreement happens, we're now going to have to break that piece. That just recognizing what the enemy, the seeds he's planted, and basically digging them up and weeding them out and putting the good seeds in. So some people, they figure out the habits that they have for the short-term seasons. You typically see things turn around real quick because they're figuring out the actions they need. While when you have years of no end in sight, that as you've reflected and looked over that are not your faults, and you're always humble, knowing you can do better and change things and help evolve that, but you trust the process and you're keeping hope alive. It's so interesting because I didn't think I had to keep hope alive until I actually had to keep hope alive. And this is different. This is different from, you're called, you're supposed to get to a place, a situation. You have a purpose, a destiny, and calling, and you're headed there, but everything looks contradictory. Anyways, yes, English was a strength of mine, but it's the season of contradiction that is looking at you and you're still pressing through. That's different if you have the negative compound effects and you're not changing your ways. Make sense? And so one thing that I realized was bitterness actually moves us into, it's not my fault, it's someone else's. And so in actively unhooking those, they're just agreements. You're just weeding out the agreements that the enemy has placed in your mind, and you're helping put in the good thoughts of knowing God is going to work out all things for our good. If in the Bible, if he says he's going to work out all things for our good, his promise is true. He's trustworthy, but that means even in dark, dark times, that promise is the light and the hope that you can hold on to. That's what I did literally through death-defying seasons, to be dramatic, but I literally would be like, Lord, remember what you said. You are faithful to complete what you started. And I would just start declaring his word. I'm not angry, but just like, this is what you said, and this is what I'm standing on. All right. So with long-term seasons, what to look for that ends up happening is habits and mindsets that you basically figure out we'll call it a time of war. And they're not the ones that you will use for when you transition out of that season and even the reconstruction. I want you to think of the Israelites, probably what they learned in the 40 years in the desert. If you notice, it did not serve them to get them into the promised land. It actually held them back because they were afraid from their habits in Egypt. And wanting to go back in the things they were like, this is hard, and they complained. So when you hit that period where you're transitioning, and all of us are in different places, you transition out of that time of war into, or the wilderness, into going into the promised land, and then reconstruction, building something. There are going to be some things that you always do, like praying, spending time in the word, things that you're not going to ever change in your life. They're just constants. But if you notice in hard seasons, sometimes those are the very things we stop. I can't tell you how many times I complained and begged to the Lord, but did I actually sit down and pray and start asking and seeking and doing the things I was doing prior to entering the hard season? And I reflected and I was like, oh man, I didn't. Or I haven't been doing it as actively, like I would do it here or there. And so when you have those habits from either a wilderness or a time of warring, those habits, if they do not transform into other things, and that's not I'm not talking about the prayer word, taking care of your body, healthy things like that. But I'm talking about the habits that you survived, like that got you through that season. They will steal from the season of promise that God has set before you. And so those are the ones that, let's be truthful. They kept you alive, but they're not going to help you thrive as you move out, and vice versa. The ones that helped you thrive sometimes will not help you keep you alive. So you have to transition and navigate that. Here's a fun example. So I was really great with scheduling with my family, just in general, and then started building Plexus as a business. And so you hear a lot about time blocking. Well, when I started having my chronic headaches, I could not keep a schedule. Like I didn't know when it would hit. I didn't know what was going on. And so I'm supposed to be homeschooling, the main financial provider for our family, and different things like that. And so what I had to do was I cannot tell you, my husband was like, can you please tell me how many more times you're going to revise that schedule? Because I think it's fine. So it wasn't actually the schedule, it was my ability to execute it. And I I was holding myself to a different standard from a previous season. Now this was time under pressure, crisis. And so I had to actually let go of the block scheduling and know that I would be able to reinstate it later. But I basically just had to get 3 top priorities done. If I did it, praise the Lord, the kids were alive, well, and fed. That was one. That was one top one, was fed and alive. So there will be periods of having to like unlearn, of trying not to die, of unlearning, keeping this thing from dying. And sometimes it's just entering into a restful place and discerning where your energy needs to go. Because I was spending so much time on that schedule, you know, I could have been spending it in a lot of more productive areas because I had no control over when the headaches would hit. But I had control when I did feel better. If I had been better prioritized, I would have been a lot more effective in our daily life. And so a couple things that really helped me in recognizing was recognizing overwhelm. And then I had to acknowledge my vulnerabilities. I had to focus on what mattered the most, and I had to formulate, she says, a flight plan for success. And then communicate my intentions clearly. And then this is the one, this is my favorite. You take a deep breath and you carry on. When you do that, you go, and you just continue on your way. You're saying, this doesn't define me. It's literally doing a physical action. That is probably, we got a lot of mental game going on, mindset, and it's saying, you don't define me, and I'm just moving on into what I can control. So if you think about just when you recognize these things, you're starting to build your ability to work through fear and what needs to be done in spite of fear. So she talks a lot about in the book of high complex, high pressure tasks in a constantly changing environment. And ever since COVID, it's been constantly changing for all of us at some point in some way. And so you have your complex tasks that you're just trying to get family, life, work, things done, but then enters a high pressure, let's say a family crisis, a health crisis, or a world crisis. So having to do that, those 3 things actually takes a skill set that is very empowering. So if you're able to shape the fear into something useful, you'll be unstoppable. How amazing is that? And I really look at Jesus, and like you think about the garden and the pressure and him just bleeding, like sweating blood and the pressure, and he was able to navigate that, and he was unstoppable, going to the cross and rising again. I'm not saying like we all need to be like Jesus, but you don't have to go kill yourself. Just let me differentiate. So for instance, when I got to a certain point with my health, I actually had the fear of dying. I was like, is this thing going to kill me? Is it going to take me away from my family? Because no one could figure out anything. It was me and the Lord figuring out what was going on. And I remember I stood in my room. I can tell you exactly how I stood and what I was doing. And I stopped, I took a deep breath, and then I closed my eyes and I took control of what I could control. I spoke to my body and I said, cells, listen, this is not our day. It will not be our day for a long time. We are created to live to 120 years, and you shall live to 120 years. And we will overcome this, and we will figure it out. And I was like, Lord, tell me what the next step is. Prior to that, I was running around trying to try this, try that, fix this, go to this doctor, do that thing. I was doing a lot of running around, almost like a chicken with its head cut off. So when I took a moment, I took a deep breath, I stilled myself, and I focused on the Lord, it created a forward momentum. And it actually, I took death off the plate. I mean, that's just how I operate. I was like, you know what? This isn't allowed. This is my life, my body. I will speak what I can. And what I actually did not do was I did not share that story or talk about how I was afraid of dying once, like at all. I did not let it leave my tongue. And I knew once I did, it would actually make it harder for me. Like, even if I was like just explaining to my husband, because I'm a verbal processor, I use a lot of words, but I knew once I released that out that I couldn't take it back. There's a fun experiment that kids did in the Bible class, is they squeezed out all the toothpaste and tried to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Yeah, not a whole lot of toothpaste went back in that tube. So what our words comes out, as our words come out, it really, we can't take them back. But I knew I couldn't control my headspace the way I wanted to, but I could control my mouth gate. And so I did. And then once I got through and broke through, it was very freeing. And I felt like I had made it. So let's talk about actionable steps. So one is you focus on what matters, your top 3 things, and then you remove the distractions. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. The quantity of your no's will affect the quality of your yeses. And sometimes under pressure, you can't even see it. And that's why you have to pray. And for instance, like that story that I just mentioned, and just know that you'll make it through and you will be okay. Because a lot of times we're pulling from our own energy resources. I'm sorry, my dog's been really barky today. We are navigating all this, the different mindsets, the activity throughout the day. And so it requires an energy output. And so what we need to do is have something pouring into us, an external source that is inputting into our energy so that it can help propel us up and out. If we don't have something pouring into us, we will basically start to tank. She talks about a fighter plane. It burns like 500 pounds of fuel every so minutes. And so there's a point when they're talking about fumes, she was saying it's like 300 pounds of fuel or something, because literally they have like seconds left. And so this can actually happen to us, that we're on a flight plan, but we haven't refueled ourselves. And so what happens, we start to nosedive. And if we don't make a landing, or we're in the middle of the ocean, we're going to end up crashing at some point, and then we're going to have to repair and lift off. So if we are able to have, even just spiritually or reading a book and growing yourself, I'll tell you, I couldn't control how much activity I could have for my business, but what I could control is how much I was reading and just inputting good things into my mind to help one navigate the situation we're in. And it helps you feel like you have a sense of control as well, because you're able to pull in something that's going to help you as you're outputting so much. And so that's number 1, focus on what matters. 2, a flight plan. So prepare, perform, prevail. So she talked about this being like a living document under revision. And sometimes you have to scrap and rewrite it. What I found was when I had to scrap and rewrite it, I felt like a failure. I couldn't predict what others would do, but I felt like I was controlling what I can control. But then if I had to scrap something, I was like, well, must have failed at that. But really the truth was, I didn't realize it needed to have that process. It needed to be living and moving and breathing, because we're living in that type of environment. God made us organic and to be changing. And so in creating that flight plan, I had to recognize that my vulnerabilities, just being self-aware, and just understanding my strengths and weaknesses, because if I'm working all out of my weaknesses, I am not going to be super happy. But if I'm working in my strengths when I can, then that actually helps fuel me and fill me, and bring a delight to really what I'm doing. I'm an extremely relational person. If y'all have known me for any little bit amount of time, I love my friends who are very able to have things organized, and different things like that. And I love bouncing ideas off of them and asking them for help. That's one thing I am good at, is asking for help typically. So the next one is your ability. So someone with chronic illness versus someone, and that chronic illness can happen for a long, long time, versus someone who's going through crisis or events that are back to back to back. It's going to look very different. So you can't compare. They're just going to be different, and the navigation will follow this. But what they have to deal with mentally is going to look, it's just going to look different. And so you have to think about what your normal self would have done is now limited. And don't feel bad about that. Because know that the longer you, like the picture I want you to see is the longer you play chess, the less pieces you have. And so then as time compounds, you feel like the pressure of decisions cost more. And so that's why having that flight plan, and focusing on what matters helps your being able to harness the fear, and be proactive and basically navigate this intense situation. I hope that made sense. I didn't feel like it made sense, but you can ask me questions later. Number 3 is communicate is what's possible. So concise, clear, precise, and consistent. So this is actually one interesting part. Because of the type of headaches I had, your nerves are directly connected to your brain. You don't have any nervous system for where pain in the rest of your body it gets buffered through the nervous system. So I had a direct link to my brain, and literally I would feel like Jekyll and Hyde. When I had those headaches, I would become a different person. And I did not like this person. And this person had a hard time communicating. It was me, I was there. But it felt like this thing outside my control literally was coming into, like, happening to my body. And I was like, what is going on? And so I became a lot more negative. I had trouble communicating my needs. But then I felt bad, because I wasn't operating like I was before. And that brings shame. Listen, y'all, the enemy will use shame to take us out and then hold us down. And so as we can recognize those pieces, we just uncouple from that and say, take a deep breath and move on. And this is the beauty. We have such an amazing community and team. And maybe you have large, other communities within where you are. Utilize those. She talks about your team. Utilize the support systems you have. Like, we didn't really have anyone to come watch the kids. So my 3-year-old was having to learn how to climb into the pantry when I was sick to get her food. Stinks. It stunk for a long time, having to be like, I'm not able to cook for my kids. They're eating mac and cheese and pizza all the time. What helped me was changing the perspective of mac and cheese and pizza are their favorite thing. And if they were watching hours of TV, because I literally was in so much pain, I was supposed to be teaching them literature-based homeschooling, and I couldn't even open my jaw to read to them for like a year. So I had a co-op with a friend. I'd be like, can you please read to them? And this is how basically I was for like about a year. And she would. I would have other people come in and read to them and pick up the slack. So know that to utilize those, but you have to communicate. And sometimes if you have or your communication breaks down, that's okay. You're going to take a deep breath, pick up, and try again. Oh my goodness. Sorry, my remarkable is going crazy. All right, no, we're good. All right, so this is where those three things intentionally become your focus. Intentionally. So that means it's going to have to be active and in the forefront of your mind. Because these seasons, they're never easy, nor should they ever be. I'm pretty sure just because we live in the world we live in, we're always going to have something. The enemy is always going to be trying to take us out. There's going to be a compound effect of decisions, uncontrollable circumstances. And so we just accept responsibility where we are and can change, and then let go of the controllables. Because listen, they are taking up mental space. They are taking up precious mental space that you do not need to be giving them. I mean, if we've been through this past COVID thing, understanding. Okay, let me backtrack. Trying to build a business and heal myself with the wisdom of the Lord and navigating literally I had the infection happen a month before COVID happened, and then everything shut down. That's a whole other thing. And then trying to navigate worry for my family, worry for the world, worry for economy, worry for health. Is it this, that, or another? I wasted so much space. If I had just concentrated, if I had known these things, I would have been able to concentrate, move forward, and I would have had a lot less mental stress. So no, you have to know that in life, risks will happen and they're just unavoidable, but they yield a high return. So the story of the talents, and I'm going to wrap up in about 3 minutes. The story of the talents, you know, the one guy, he buried his talent. The other ones invested it. Well, fear steals. He was afraid, and that's what he said. Did you know in some translations, it talks about that talent actually means influence for cities. And so his influence to the area he was called was actually stolen because he was afraid. And so when I realized that the different things I was going through, if fear was coming in and stealing and I was hiding and I wasn't being intentional and moving things forward, that it would end up happening like him. I would just want to bury it, not have to deal with it. Y'all ever felt like that? Be like, just put the dirt under the carpet. But the cool thing is God has ways that he's designed our brains and our bodies to help activate the different systems and reactions we can have. Self-awareness is definitely big. So as we, how do we mitigate that tension and anxiety? We do it over and over and over again. Have you guys ever like had something that really scared you and you did it once, or you ever have to navigate that with your kids and you're like, okay, like the bike, dude, I mean, trying to ride a bike is really hard. And so the encouragement, having someone come alongside you, I'm going to say you can't do it alone. Like you cannot navigate high, intense stress situations, life alone. That's where, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So just under pressure, know that you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training or the level of your habits. And so knowing connection, this is where I was about to go. Connection is huge because isolation is exactly what the enemy wants. And isolation is formed in circumstances, mindset, and physical limitations. Now, boundaries are different because they add to you, they don't subtract to you. But the isolation is really easy to fall into. And a lot of people have fallen into it the past 2.5 years. And be aware of where even little places where you're like, where have I fallen into this? Okay, I'm going to save the rest for later. But that hopefully, let me know if that was clear. If you guys have any questions, basically that's breaking down 3 things that you can intentionally do to help move it forward. And then on the other hand, just know it's going to be okay. You're going to make it through. God is going to work it out, especially as you seek him and move forward in him, and just take that time. I'm telling you, taking a deep breath and just sitting sometimes feels impossible, especially if you're a mom. You go to turn on the hot water and you hear your voice being called, or you go to sit down to a Zoom and something crashes and falls. You're like, I hope everyone's okay. So just know it is possible. So let me know if you have any questions, and I would love your feedback. Let me stop this.